Hi, Safe Jerseyans. This is Matt Rooney with SafeJersey.com. We're only a few days from Election Day here in New Jersey, but we're taking a little break from Election 2013 because we have a very special guest, and pretty soon elections will be over, phone banks will be closed, and you're going to need a winter reading list. And we have a great book for you. It's called Breakout, and if you look at the jacket, it says Pioneers of the Future, Prison Guards of the Past, and the epic battle that will decide America's fate. And the author is none other than former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who you may have seen most recently as the host of the reboot of Crossfire on CNN, which I'm really enjoying, by the way. Mr. Speaker, thanks so much for touching base with Save Jersey.
Well, listen, we're delighted to have a chance to chat, and I'm very excited by Breakout, which I think does give us some answers that will enable us to get beyond the gridlock in Washington. And I'm frankly very excited because I'll be at Ridgewood at Bookends Monday night at 7 p.m. along with my wife, Callista, who has her third children's history book for 4 to 8-year-olds with Ellis the Elephant, Yankee Doodle Dandy, about the American Revolution. So we've become kind of a book-writing couple, and we're both thrilled to be back in New Jersey on Monday.
Yeah, I think you're easily one of the most prodigious writers in the conservative movement, hands down, going on 20 years. Something that's interesting to me, though, Mr. Speaker, coming out of 2012, obviously, Republicans didn't do too well. That may be an understatement in some respects. And every single group in Washington, and many people that have a platform, are putting out their own version of a treatise or a policy platform that they think the GOP should adopt going forward. What makes Breakout unique is that you're not just proposing ideas, you're, in a way, proposing a new way of thinking for Republicans and conservative candidates. Is it the fact that you used to be a professor that encouraged you to go in this direction, or what else is inspiring you to try to take this approach to getting conservatism back on the right track?
Well, I think the thing that most drives my thinking is the effort to constantly look at reality and at how dramatically things change. I mean, just consider the smartphone that most of our listeners have. Look at its capabilities and compare it to a cell phone that's 10 years ago, or go back to 25 years and compare it to a world before cell phones were common. We're living through extraordinary revolutions that are giving us more tools, more opportunities, more information, more convenience, in many cases lower cost, except in government. And it's been the inability to transfer modern breakthroughs in science, technology, entrepreneurship into public policy. And I think both parties have been trapped into a bankrupt model in which you have two parties of pain. Democrats want to cause you pain by raising taxes and borrowing money from your children and grandchildren. The Republicans want to cause you pain by cutting spending. And so people just bounce back and forth between two undesirable futures, and yet in the rest of your life, you see great opportunities. You see better health care, better learning, more information, a great revolution in energy. We're now the #1 oil and gas producer in the world. All these things are, I think, very exciting opportunities that are not translated into public policy.
You're proposing that the party break out, but one of my questions for you is, how did Republicans, how did conservatives become chained to begin with? Is it, and this, I'm just spitballing here, Mr. Speaker, this is one of my ideas, does it have something to do with the permanent political class? The idea that you have all of these various PACs and organizations that raise money just by kind of throwing red meat out there instead of coming up with a more constructive approach?
I think that's part of it. I've been very critical of the consulting class and said that because they don't know any history and they don't think about ideas, they come up with 30-second attack ads and think that's creativity. But I think it's also deeper than that. First of all, when you think about the last half century, if you're a conservative, your two great shining moments are Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Now that's two individuals out of, literally millions of people who are trying to get something done. And I think part of the reason is it's really hard. I wrote Breakout. I've been actively involved in thinking about public life and thinking about what America needs since August of 1958, when my dad, as a career soldier, was stationed in France, and I'd watched the French Fourth Republic get killed by the paratroopers and General de Gaulle brought back to create the Fifth Republic. And I thought, countries should die. I mean, bad leadership is really expensive. And so I've dedicated a large part of my life to understanding three things. What does America need to do to remain free and safe? How would you explain it so the American people would give you permission to do it? And if they gave you permission, how would you implement it? And so I've had probably an unusual career of thinking about these things and doing so with a lot of very smart people like the Training and Doctrine Command of the U.S. Army, for example. And as a result, I approach things very differently from most Republican or Democratic activists because I try to approach them from a combination of historic principles going back to the Founding Fathers combined with emerging science and technology and entrepreneurship. And it's that combination, I think, that makes such a dramatic difference.
And one of the more interesting points I think you raised is you mentioned Reagan and Thatcher. I'm 28 years old, Mr. Speaker. You're the earliest successful conservative leader that I can remember. And I do think that's part of the problem, and that's not a knock at you. It's that conservatives continue to cite these individuals that are distant memories. My paradigm for conservatism isn't the same, and I think for a lot of people, they think it's the Bush administration. Do you see that as an obstacle to overcome, the fact that there just aren't really any good examples out there right now in public life?
Well, we talk a lot about prison guards of the past who are the active opponents of the future, but we also talk about prisoners of the past. And those are people whose minds are trapped into a world that doesn't work anymore. And I would say that that's a big problem for the conservative movement. You have a lot of people out here who chant mantras as though that's a replacement for thinking. I think that it's very important, and Breakout tries to indicate how different a politics that said we can get to a balanced budget, we can get to a smaller federal government, we can get to better learning, more economic growth, better jobs, more take-home pay, better health at lower costs. All these things are doable, but they're not doable inside the old paradigm. It's not the old left versus the old right. This Breakout is about a new and very different way of doing things.
Yeah, and you talk about a number of extremely interesting technologies that I have to be honest, some of them I've never heard of, and I suspect many of the people who are going to buy Breakout starting Monday, November 4th, have probably never heard of them either. Could you maybe just talk about a couple of the examples?
Sure. I mean, I think there's so many exciting things going on. First, probably the least radical is the rise of online learning, starting with the Khan Academy and with Kaplan University and with Udacity and others. There's now been a contract signed between Udacity and Georgia Tech, for example, to take a $70,000 a year master's program in computing and turn it into a $7,000 a year program online. Now, that's a revolution in cost and a revolution in opportunity. A whole new generation will be able to study computer science in a way that nobody would have thought possible 10 or 15 years ago. So those are the kind of things I look at and I think, wow, this is really exciting stuff. And this gives us a real opportunity to create a better future. Regenerative medicine is one of my personal favorites. That's where they take your cells from your body, they grow them and cultivate them, and then they now use 3D printing so that let's say you need a new kidney. They grow your personal kidney using your cells to put them back in your body, so you have no rejection. You don't need any of those very difficult and very expensive medicines that transplants require. And all of this is coming down the road very rapidly. We have lots of information in Breakout about how these kind of things. You look at the energy revolution. I had a chance to be in Philadelphia talking to the Marcellus Shale Coalition in October. And the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, Ohio, has literally huge quantities of natural gas. It's creating wealth on an amazing scale. And it's turning America into the number one producer of natural gas in the world, something which nobody 10 or 12 years ago thought was possible. So these are the kind of things that to me are just tremendously exciting.
And that's a segue to my next question, which is there's some great substance in your book about the kinds of things that successful Republican candidates of tomorrow should probably talk about. The form is what's equally important. I'm sure you'd agree. And there's an example in recent history of resistance to one of these ideas that jumps out at me, and I know it's familiar to you, which is the whole concept of asteroid mining. That's something that you brought up when you ran for president in 2012. And I have to be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, I watched some of those presidential debates with my brother and my father, both of whom are engineers and they're sci-fi geeks. They loved your idea. But I would say a majority of the media, and even some in our own party, laughed at your idea, when it's something that I think not too long after you concluded your candidacy, James Cameron and some of the Google guys came out with a very similar idea. Now, I don't think anyone would ever accuse you of being anything but extremely articulate. But what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we able to sell these types of ideas without the liberal media laughing us out of the room?
Well, Greta Van Susteren was the one person on television who really got it. And she said to me, we did an interview, and she said she was really struck by the difference between John F. Kennedy's reception and mine. She said, when you realize that John F. Kennedy in May of 1981, when he said 1961, when he said we'll go to the moon in this decade, we didn't have the technology. We had never done it before. We didn't have anybody who had ever been in space. All of this had to be invented, and we did it all in less than 8 years. Now you turn around and you have this exactly opposite reaction. We've had 50 years of learning about doing things in space. We have bureaucratized it, we've governmentalized it, we've red taped it, we've made it boring. We have done everything we could to drive the life out of space travel. And I think it tells you about our current culture. That a visionary, bold idea, and by the way, I wanted to do it in the private sector, which would cost about 10% as much as doing it through the government. So when I got attacked by Romney and others, it was a display of stunning ignorance on their part, and I thought was deliberately, tactically negative in a way that did a disservice to the country.
No, and that's one point where I absolutely agree with you. It was really disheartening. If we can't look at the bigger picture, and if we can't communicate that in an optimistic way, then we might as well hang it up. Just one man's opinion.
Yeah, but I think one of the lessons I learned from Ronald Reagan and from Margaret Thatcher is that if you're willing to be consistent and dedicated, and you have the courage to continue to advocate something positive, you eventually wear out the negative naysayers, because the average American wants to have a better future. The average American wants to be positive. And so they're sort of, I think, irritated when they see people who are petty and small-minded and stupid.
Mr. Speaker, why do you think that Republicans have such a hard time adopting an optimistic tone? Something you talk about throughout your book, and something which we've talked about a lot today, is the importance of maintaining this optimistic, large-scale vision. But it seems like lately, maybe it's under the avalanche of all of these regulations and failed Obama administration policies, we've become a little shrill. Is that a matter of just promoting the right types of candidates, or is it an attitude change that we all need?
No. I think it's a very core disagreement about reality. And you got a little bit of it with Romney's comment about the 47% last year. Reagan and I think Thatcher, about whom I'm slightly less certain, although I did know her pretty well, but certainly for Reagan and me, there was a core belief that we had two huge advantages. One was that the vast majority of Americans wanted a better future, so we thought of ourselves as talking to a majority, not a minority. And the other was that we thought that the underlying lessons of history were overwhelmingly on our side. And therefore we thought over time we would win. Reagan was that, this is the guy who began talking about communism in 1947, began giving national political speeches in 64, ran for governor in 66, lost the presidential campaign in 58, lost the presidential campaign in 76. When he finally won in 80, he said he hadn't changed, but the country gradually came around. I had the same feeling. I tried for 16 years to create a majority in the House, and we finally succeeded in 94. But both of us had this long-term confidence, which lets you be optimistic, that we thought we both represented the long-term pattern of history, and we thought we represented the majority of the American people. And I think that's part of what you have missing when you talk to these folks, and I think it's a real problem.
Let's take these principles that you set forth in Breakout and apply it to the ongoing healthcare debate. It's no secret. It's all over the news. Even the mainstream media is reporting it. Obamacare is already failing. I know in my state, there was one report recently that an upwards of 850,000 people in New Jersey are going to lose their preferred plan. Premiums are spiking in New Jersey anywhere between 15 and 18%. And we have a $500 million website that doesn't even work. How do we take the principles that you're talking about here in Breakout, Mr. Speaker, the strategies, and apply it to the election that's coming up in 2014? What should candidates on our side of the aisle be talking about?
Well, I think we need a health bill of rights for the American people. And again, it has to be much like the Contract with America. It has to be simple, clear, straightforward. It should start with the idea that we want every American to have access to appropriate health care, which is different than health insurance. I mean, they're trying to solve the wrong problem, and by the way, even by their own standard, they fail. There are millions of Americans who will not have insurance under Obamacare. So they've gone to all of this effort. They've tried to fix this thing. They have messed up the entire health program in the United States. And even by their own measurements, they're going to fail by millions and millions of people because it may not be solvable the way they're trying to do it. So start with the idea every American should have appropriate health care if they need it. Second, every American should have some responsibility for their own health, and they should have knowledge about their own health status. So you ought to own your medical record. Right now it's owned by your doctor and your hospital and your insurance company, but you should own it. Third, you ought to have the right to choose the doctor in the hospital which you think is best for you. This idea of closed systems and deals that are cut, and suddenly you lose your doctor because the insurance company has got a new deal going on. I think it's in Concord, New Hampshire. The hospital there is not part of the insurance package, so you actually have to drive down to Manchester, which in midwinter in New Hampshire is not all that much fun. Because it's all because of insurance deals. It's not because of health. So there are things we need to think through and hammer out first. What are the principles around which we need to rebuild the health system? And that's very different. We have several chapters in Breakout that talks about this. That's very different than trying to do slightly more or slightly less of Obamacare.
And I know you'll correct me if I'm misstating your position, but the Congress is dealing with the budget process right now. Paul Ryan and Republicans are engaging it, trying to strategize and come up with a way to move the ball down the field, and you have criticized this notion of we are going to balance pain against pain. The Democrats want tax hikes. We want to eliminate benefits. Not that you're for big government. I don't think anybody would accuse you of that either, but you think that we're kind of setting up a false paradigm. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I have to suggest here, in addition to having written Breakout, I'm always kind of surprised about the reluctance to learn from history. And I say this at a personal level. As Speaker of the House, I helped negotiate with President Clinton the only 4 consecutive balanced budgets of your lifetime. Now, you would think that somebody would want to come to Clinton and say, hey, how did you guys do this? But I don't know of anybody in either party who's wanted to learn from history, so they're out here. And they want us to think it's a really good deal if we get some kind of grand agreement where we cause you pain in your pocketbook by raising taxes, so we can then cause you pain in your pocketbook by cutting your entitlements. And some Republicans think they're being clever because instead of having a redistributionist tax increase, they want to have a redistributionist benefit cut and cut benefits to people who are successful more than they do to others. I don't find any of that very attractive. And I try to suggest this literally is what led to Breakout. In 1981, Dick Cheney, who was then the policy committee chairman, he briefed me on a meeting he'd had with Dave Stockman, who was Reagan's budget director. And he showed me the long-term spending patterns of the federal government. And I said, Dick, you can't solve that problem inside traditional politics. It's not possible. The system can't bear the level of pain it's going to require. So you've got to start thinking about a totally new approach. That, in many ways, that 1981 conversation was the beginning of the book Breakout some 30 years later. And the point's this. There's a brand new company in California which has developed a microtechnology so they can take a drop of your blood and they can do 1,000 different diagnostic tests on one drop of your blood. Now, they believe that they're going to be able to cut the cost of diagnostics in Medicare and Medicaid $115 billion over the next 10 years. Now, that to me is a smart budget deal. But what if we simply said, we're going to, of course, the people who are going to yell the prison guards of the past are going to be every hospital's lab and every lab company. And the lab companies refuse to tell you their prices. They tell you their trade secrets. They don't even tell you what their prices are, which is absurd. But it's typical of why the health system doesn't work right now. So you've got to be prepared to stand up and say, look, I want to provide better technology at lower cost to give you better information faster. Now tell me why we, the American people, shouldn't have that. That saves $115 billion. Doesn't hurt any senior citizen, doesn't hurt any medical doctor, and really changes the dynamics and the speed with which we gather information. I can take you through case after case after case like that. And yet, it's very hard to get Washington to think about doing things better as opposed to doing more or less of the same old thing.
The book is Breakout. It hits shelves, hardback edition, starting Monday, November 4th. Mr. Speaker, I have one more question for you. I'm obliged to ask because we're a New Jersey website. I'm sure you're watching the elections in New Jersey and Virginia. We don't want to prejudge anything because we want everybody to go vote, but it's looking like the Republicans in trouble in Virginia, but it looks like Chris Christie's on track to win by a double-digit margin here in New Jersey. Are you detecting, in this late stage of these races, any breakout-related lessons or anything that Republicans generally across the country should be taking away from what we're seeing play out here on the Eastern Seaboard?
Sure. Well, let me say, first of all, I'm watching Virginia very carefully because depending on which poll you're looking at, it's conceivable that Virginia is tightening up very rapidly as people start thinking about Terry McAuliffe as governor and start thinking about just exactly how far to the left he'd be and how much he would change the very nature of the state of Virginia.
Frightening.
So that'll be a very interesting election night result, and we're going to do a special edition of Crossfire that night looking at the results. I think in New Jersey, this is going to be a big national story. Governor Christie, I suspect, is going to win by more than 20 points. So he's going to come in at better than 60-40. He's going to win with remarkable share of the African-American vote, the Latino vote, the Asian-American vote. He's going to do much better with young people and with women than most Republicans. And I suspect you're going to see him the following week be the cover of Time magazine and probably be the cover of the New York Times magazine within a few weeks. And he's going to be a big story, and he should be a big story. I mean, anybody who can govern a blue state as effectively and aggressively as he has to be considered a serious contender for the presidency, and somebody who's got the ability to bring something to Washington that's kind of special.
Every New Jerseyan listening to this needs to remember that Newt Gingrich and his wife, Callista Gingrich, are going to be in Ridgewood, and that's Monday night at 7 p.m., correct, Mr. Speaker?
That's right, Election Eve.
Election Eve, right? So once you get done at the phone bank, you don't want to call people much past that time anyway. They're eating dinner. They're watching something like Crossfire. They don't want to be bothered. It's at the Bookends Bookstore, and we're going to post this information when we post the interview, but it's located at 211 East Ridgewood Avenue in good old Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is central Bergen County, for those of you who aren't from that part of the state. Very friendly people. I don't know if you remember, Mr. Speaker, I met you as a college Republican at Catholic University back in 2005.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's it. As you know, my wife sings at the Basilica right there at Catholic University. So, we look forward to seeing you. If you get a chance to come out that night and come by and see both of us, and we look forward to seeing all of the folks who are listening and their friends if they'd like to come that evening.
Speaker Gingrich, it's been fantastic having you. Please keep us in the loop. Please consider stopping back in as we get close to 2014 and 2016. And we wish you all the best. You're still an important opinion leader in the party.
Well, thank you. And people should know that they can go to GingrichProductions.com and sign up. And we keep them on the loop because we do 2 newsletters for free every week electronically. And we want people to come to GingrichProductions.com and feel like they can stay in the loop if they want to. Okay?
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.